Hi, welcome back to my channel, Manga Hoarder. My name is Laura, and today I'm talking about my favorite reads of 2019. So I am going to go through my top 10 favorite manga. I'm also going to tell you about my favorite comics and my favorite novel that I read in the year, but I'm going to start out with my favorite manga. And I'm actually going to start out with my 11th favorite, or not a favorite at all, but really probably the most impactful manga that I read. All of the manga that I mentioned, though, they're either going to be manga that I read for the first time, the first volume, or read for the first time, the last volume in 2019. Because it's really hard to say, you know, this was my favorite manga of the year, because they serialize over, most of them at least serialize over many years. So I give it sort of two chances to make my favorite lists, and these ones did this year. So starting off is a title that I read because of the 1001 Comics project that's reading all of the manga that are listed in the 1001 Comics You Must Read Before You Die book. And I've only read the first volume so far. I am hoping to read further in it. The reason I haven't is just because this is a hard-hitting topic for me and a really impactful manga, and that is Barefoot Ken by Keiji Nakazawa. This is an autobiographical story about Nakazawa as a young boy living in Hiroshima and seeing his family destroyed, seeing his city destroyed, seeing his life destroyed, and it is, yeah, it's amazing. It's an amazing read, but it is incredibly horrifying at the same time. You know, knowing that this is an autobiography, knowing that this is an autobiography really just makes it that much more impactful. It's something that I definitely will never forget reading. Is it my favorite though? Definitely not my favorite, but it definitely was very, very impactful and a very good, important read, and I think you should check it out. So my number 10 is a manga that I have read before, just not in this edition because it's pretty new. This is Urusei Yatsura by Rumiko Takahashi, an Eisner inductee, Hall of Famer, and just sort of all-round writes wonderful manga. Really funny manga, lots of really kind of iconic series. This one in particular, incredibly iconic. Who doesn't know Lum? And she's just like the most fantastic character. This is a slapstick comedy, I guess I would describe it as. It's primarily, at least at the first volume, is centered around Ataru Moriboshi, who is a womanizer, and Lum, this beautiful alien Oni, comes down from a spaceship and ends up falling in love with him. And he, in some way, I think proposes to her, that he doesn't really know he proposes to her, and she gets sort of the wrong idea, I guess, about his interest in her, and so she pursues him very earnestly, and he runs away from her. And it is really a story about a lot of girls falling in love with him, where personally I don't think he has many redeeming qualities at all, but it's just sort of like the humor of that, how silly it is. It's very, very silly. I will say that Takahashi is fairly repetitive in her comedic gags, and so this series in particular is one that I feel like isn't really good for reading in, like, not a good binge read for my particular style of reading. I don't like to binge read it, but I do really like picking this up, reading a chapter, and then maybe a month later reading another chapter, maybe more how it would have been serialized in a magazine. I think that the humor works in small doses, and the character of Lum is just, she's pure delightful. So I really do love this manga, and I'm so happy to see a new release of it and finally getting to read it. There's a few volumes out now. My number 9 for the year is, actually it's not a volume 1, but it's sort of a standalone short story, and that is The Bug Boy. This is a standalone story in the Hino Horror series. I imagine it was released as such in English. I'm not sure it was released as such in Japanese, so I'm just going to count it as volume 1. I recently found this, picked it up this year, and it's just classic, innocent Hideshi Hino horror. It's very gross, but very cute at the same time. It's a story about a young boy who really people just don't understand him, and the only thing that he really understands is animals and insects, and he just loves them. Like that's the company he wants to keep. Something ends up happening where an insect that he's keeping bites him, and it transforms him into an insect itself. His family are completely grossed out by him and so try to murder him, and he ends up eventually becoming an insect, like not just physically but also mentally becoming an insect, becoming this horror murder insect who is very innocent sort of at the same time. It's disgusting, and the things he does is disgusting, and I don't know, there's just something about it that was just like put a smile to my face. It was just really cute and quirky and fun. I really love Hideshi Hino. His horror is just really appeals to me for some reason. It always sort of creates some sort of a physical response. Like I am either just smiling or I feel ill or, you know, something like that. I really love his books, and every time I find anything that he's published, particularly in English, I have been picking them up. So I think there's still 2 volumes in this series we don't own yet, and then we have everything that he published or that is published of his in English. But yes, absolutely loved this manga. It was so much fun. If you have a chance to read Hideshi Hino and you are okay with horror, I would definitely give any of his books a try, but this one in particular was quite adorable. My number 8 is another sort of standalone or single volume. It is just weird, psychedelic, strange. I don't know how to describe it. There isn't really a plot, and the final phrase in the manga, which is the only phrase in the manga, absolutely turns your brain inside and out. It is just strange. This is The Boxman by Emiri Sakabashira. It is generally a travelogue or travel experience. These 2 characters are traveling on a motorbike they're delivering a package. They're just traveling through Tokyo, through popular culture, through a lot of strange things, and then they just eventually come to the end of their journey. Sort of psychedelic travel experience. It's very strange. Probably would enjoy it even more if I was, you know, smoking something. Unfortunately I don't, so this is as experienced as I can have it, but it completely blew my mind. I loved every minute of it. I loved the illustration in it. Just so weird and absurd and really memorable, and the second that I finished reading it, well, maybe not the second because I sat there for probably 10 full seconds just completely bewildered and completely just unable to express my thoughts on it, that I just turned it over, read it all over again. I think I read it several times in that one sitting just because I was like, what did I just read? I can't even express it. So this was just really memorable, really impactful, really weird, and I loved every second of it. So highly recommend if you like weird things that have no plot and you don't know what they mean. Number 7 is the first volume of Eminon. This is Memories of Eminon by Shinji Kajio and Kenji Tsuruta. This is the story of a young woman or a young being. I don't know if they're a woman the whole time, but they're a woman in this particular story, and you learn about their life, and basically what you discover is that they have an eternal conscience. They have experienced life at the very dawn of life, and they just continue to be reincarnated and continue to have a long extended memory of every sort of reincarnation experience. So on this one, they are traveling on a sort of like on a ferry, and they come across a young man and they have a discussion with him and tell their story. And it really is just sort of like what does it mean? Why do I have this memory? Why am I the only one who lives forever? What is this whole experience? And so it's just sort of this really interesting exploration of the value of having this sort of eternal memory. And I was really, really good, really interesting, really moving, really poetic. It just has this great atmosphere to it. The illustration in it is really just really, really delightful. Kind of a sketchy, loose style. It just suits the storytelling really well. And I just really love it. This sort of clinching. Tsuruta is one of my favorite mangaka, or favorite new discoveries of mangaka. I know his work has been in English for quite a long time, and I have another one that I haven't read yet, which is actually currently in my room, and I am looking forward to diving into at some point. But yeah, this was just a really fantastic story. There are 3 volumes out now at the point, at least of when I'm recording this, and it's been just delightful. There's another series as well that is coming out by this author. Anyway, I'm really loving Tsuruta right now, and this story in particular is just so good. I'm loving it to pieces. I might be getting my numbers wrong, but I think this is number 6. And it is the full series. I read the full series of Bokurano or Hours by Mohiro Kito. This is kind of a strange science fiction story, basically where these children who are on summer camp from school, they're exploring sort of on their free day, they go into a cave. In that cave they find a man working at a computer, and he says, hey, you're bored, do you want to play this game? And so he has them sign a contract to play this strange game where they get to battle science fiction or monsters who are going to threaten their town. What they don't realize is that this game that they're playing is actually real life, and through every player's turn, at the end of that turn, the character who's playing, or one of these children, will have to die. It is sort of a big sacrifice. Will you die for your planet? And it goes through every single story of every child and their experience sort of at that last day, because they're called before the last day. They know when it's their turn to play the game, and their response to that, their response to life and their end of life and the decision they have to make. It's really good. It's really interesting. It isn't as harrowing as you would expect. I was expecting to have really strong feelings towards a lot of these characters, but it was just more of this like psychological look at what these characters were doing that I found really fascinating. I thought it was a great story and I really enjoyed it. I also found it really interesting as I was reading this that it felt very familiar to something that I was reading in the, there's a Dark Horse magazine that was released back in the late 90s. Actually, it's here on the floor. I'm going to check. The magazine is called Super Manga Blast, and this author actually has a manga that was published in that I had been reading a couple of days before I had picked this up, and so I was finding it very similar to that, and I can't remember what the series is, so I'd have to actually flip through to figure that out, but I'll put it up on the screen or down in the box below. But I just found it really interesting because there's just like really quirky, strange, alien inventions that this author has come up with that are just so different than any other sort of science fiction-y type stories that I've read. I'm not a big science fiction reader. I've read enough though to know that this feels very different than a lot of the other series that I've read. So it was just made me think a lot. It was just a very thoughtful story, and yeah, I was really invested in this story while I was reading it, so I enjoyed it a lot. My number 5 for the year is a title that I read because of the 1001 Comics, and actually 2 more that I will show you in my top 5 are also from my 1001 Comics reading experience. That one is Monster by Naoki Urasawa. I had read a couple of volumes before and I had seen a good chunk of the anime, never finished it. But I never cared for it before. I just was not really that interested in it, and because I pulled it out of the hat or the jar, I ended up reading it this time, and I'm really glad I did. I think I was just really in the mood for this story. This is a sort of a cat and mouse detective adventure-y type story where at the beginning you've got Dr. Tenma, who is sort of this genius doctor. He has really bright prospects. He looks like he's going to be doing really well at this hospital. And he decides, I think because he's in this position where people are really taking advantage of him and he doesn't like it. And he doesn't want to be taking advantage of people. He doesn't want to leverage his career by hurting people. And so a prominent politician comes in, I can't remember, or their son or someone related to a prominent figure comes in with an emergency, and also this young boy comes in with, I can't remember, is it a bullet wound to the head? And because he's a neurologist, he decides to save this young boy. It turns out this is the wrong decision, because not only is he really lose his position, his standing at the hospital, he also ends up, as it turns out, saving a serial killer. And so he ends up realizing that, feeling that he's responsible for making this decision. He's going to make it right. And so he ends up leaving the hospital and trying to track down this boy and trying to bring him to justice by, his intention is to murder him. So it is the story of trying to figure out who this boy is and what his past is and why he's doing the things he's doing, and trying to follow along and trying to figure out his mindset. So that's what Dr. Tenma is doing. In the meantime, he's also visiting a lot of people and helping them out, sort of as I would say, inspiration from Tezuka's Blackjack character. There's a lot of Tezuka inspirations in this manga. I heard that I think the boy character in this, I can't even remember what his name is. Does it say on the back? Anyway, the boy that he saves, I think is inspired by Mu by Tezuka. Definitely the name Dr. Tenma comes from Astro Boy. This whole doctoring storyline, I think, also comes from Blackjack. So I feel like there's a lot of Tezuka influence in this story. I thought this was a really well-constructed story until the finale. And the finale, I think, Tezuka, I think Urasawa really kind of lets down his characters. At the end, it really fizzles out. He has to introduce characters quickly to resolve the problem, and I think that was just a mistake on his part. But in general, it was exciting. There was lots of interesting characters in it. You didn't really know where things were coming from or where they were coming at you. So it kept you engaged, even though it was a fairly long series. I thought it was just really well written, really interesting, really exciting. Trying to figure out how it all kind of pieced together. There's a lot of twists and turns. This is just a good all-around manga, and there's a reason why people recommend it. When people say, hey, what's a good manga to read? I see Monster recommended all the time. There's a reason for it. It's a great manga, and I would also highly recommend giving it a try, particularly if you're looking for something a little more like mystery, thriller type story. This is a really good one. My number 4 for the year is a comedy series, and I had read the first volume a few years before, and then I finally finished reading it in 2019. That is Haven't You Heard I'm Sakamoto? This is by Nami Sano. This is just so much fun, and it is one of the most complete and most perfectly written comedy series that I have read. It's basically about Sakamoto, as you can tell from the title. He's perfect. I think he's a new student, but he's perfect. He can do everything. He knows everything. All the boys hate him because they want to best him. All the girls want to date him because he's just perfection. And he foils everyone, and it's just and gets everyone to be on his side, on his team. And there's just something about this, the way it's written, the way it's handled, the comedy points. It just makes fun of itself. It's really lighthearted. It isn't too long. Comedy series often get too long. It's fresh the whole time. It's just so much fun, and I really, really loved every moment of this manga. Highly recommend it. If you like comedy, check this out. It's perfect. It's only 4 volumes long. It's just like the complete package. It ends really satisfyingly. Yeah, I was absolutely in love with it. It's a great title. Highly recommend it. My number 3 is sort of a almost comedy but horror manga, and that is Dementia 21 by Shintaro Kago. This is such a delightful read. There's a second volume that's supposed to be releasing either end of December, hopefully it's out actually, or I think early 2020. That's supposed to have a Santa Claus story in it, which I can't wait for. It's basically about this young girl here on the cover, and she is a worker at sort of a home care worker that helps with seniors. So she is just sort of the top worker at this particular organization, and she makes some people really jealous, and so they convince the person who does the scheduling to send her out on the hardest jobs, and so she ends up getting sent out on these really bizarre, strange jobs. You know, there's one where she ends up having to do like military maneuvers with, you know, senior citizens on her back. There's one story in particular I loved where, because she does such a good job, the other people are just dumping their senior citizens on her, and to the point where her home, or the place that she's taking care of these seniors, is so full of seniors that the whole building just bursts and the seniors go flying into the air. It is so bizarre and weird and silly and just strange. There is a little bit of horror to it, but I think that if you're afraid of horror, this is a really fairly safe one. It's not really scary, it's just more strange, and it is just a delightful read. I loved every stinking minute of it. I was recommended when I read this to read it in small chunks, or to read one chapter at a time, and I did do that, and I completely agree that is the best way to read it. So if you ever get your hands on this and want to read it, I would highly recommend checking out, or highly recommend reading it sort of just a chapter at a time, maybe a chapter a night, but don't just sit down and binge read it, because again, this is another type of read where because it's so absurd, the absurdity kind of builds up to a point where it doesn't become absurd anymore, and it's not as fun to read. So I think you really need to have sort of a fresh mindset every time you get into a new story. Then you can really enjoy the absurdity of it, and that's all it is. It's just absurdity, and I loved it so much. This was just such a great manga. I was so happy that this got released. So much fun. My number 2 for the year is another horror manga. And this one I think you can get digitally, even though it is out of print physically. I also know that this author is coming out, or there is another title coming out by this author in 2020. So there is another title coming out by this author. I definitely will have my hands on it. This was just brilliant. And another title that I got from the 1001 Comics book. This is Dragonhead by Minetaru Mochizuki. This is the story, basically, of the end of the world. And it is horrifying, it is terrifying, it is one of those stories that just, it is overwhelming. There is just something that is so incredibly overwhelming by this story. It is about a class who are on a trip. They're on their way home back to Tokyo. Something happens, a catastrophic event happens, and they get trapped inside the tunnel in the train. There's a train accident, they're trapped inside the tunnel, and there are 3 survivors from this entire train, 3 classmates. It ends up progressing so that only 2 make it out onto the surface. I'm going to give you that much. I think it'll be pretty obvious as you're reading it how it all works out. And what they discover on the surface of the earth is just horrifying, and every moment that they find something that looks like hope, it's even more terrifying than the last thing that they experienced. And it ends on a very hopeless, very scary note. This is not a hope-bringing story. It is overwhelming. They do come across some characters who have banded together, and through it you realize that this is really a manga that is it is sort of exploring the themes of fear and what is fear and what does fear look like, and it is really expressing to you fear, is giving you that experience of fear so it can discuss what fear is. It is really, really fantastic. It is so amazing. I will say though, sort of as a warning, before you pick this up, there is quite a lot of scenes of rape in it, so if that is something that will, you know, turn you off from reading something that's already a horror manga, it's already terrifying, that is the one sort of extra of it that I'll give you a little warning of. But it was so fantastic. It is probably never going to leave me. I don't know if I'll ever have to read it again if I decide to, just because there are some scenes in it that are just so memorable, so emotionally moving in a not lighthearted way that I don't know that I'll ever forget this one. So a really, really great manga, and if you're ready to be afraid, I would definitely recommend checking this one out. And then for my number ones, I only have a number one for my novels and for my comics, so I'm going to talk about those first, and then we'll get into number one for manga. For my novel, the top read that I had for the year was called Rue by Kim Thuy. I don't know how to pronounce that last name, and I should have looked it up beforehand. Vietnamese Canadian author. It is a story of their experience in Vietnam before the Vietnam War, and then their experience moving to Canada because of the Vietnam War, and what life is like on sort of both sides of that war, both sides of the, you know, what life was like in the country, Vietnam versus Canada, what life was like as a child versus now, what life was like in comparing, you know, her children's experience versus her experience, her parents' experience versus her experience. It was really, really good, really moving. It really was written in a strange way where there was very little text, like little snippets of memory, and they were going back and forth between childhood and adulthood and countries and content, and the stories really didn't flow in any way. You don't really get a full, complete picture, but it just sort of, because it sort of looks like it was an exploration of memory, it's just sort of how memories work, that you just get these snippets. You know, you're just, for me personally, you know, I'm just driving down the street and I'll get this really random memory of something that happened, you know, 30 years ago, and it's like, why is this coming to my mind now? So that's just how that book worked, and it was just beautiful, and I loved it. I ended up buying it and reading it for the Asian readathon. I just sort of randomly chose a whole bunch of Asian authors from various Asian countries, put them in my cart on Book Depository and bought them, and that one particularly was a good title. Actually, I think everything I read for that, apart from the group read, I thought was a good title, so that was really good. I still have quite a few books left from that haul too to read, so I think it'll be a good year next year when I can get to some of them. My top comic for the year, and I only read 9, I read 14 novels last year, I only read 9 comics that were not manga, which is just scandalous in my opinion. I don't think I've ever read so few in a year since I started reading comics. Yeah, I can't believe it. But my favorite was Safari Honeymoon by Jesse Jacobs. This is another one that's just like really weird and psychedelic and absurd. It's about a couple who are going on their honeymoon and they go to this weird safari. It's very dangerous. They have a guide with them, and through the course of this story, you know, they are basically, I don't know if they're bitten by something in the forest and become poisonous, or they're ingested. I can't remember exactly how it worked, but it's just really weird and strange and dreamlike and absurd, and there's just some like, I don't know, just like beautiful illustrations that are just, I don't know, there's something about it that just really appealed to me. I really liked it quite a lot. I know there's a new Jacobs title coming out, I think in 2020, or it just came out, which I'm hoping to read as well. I've only read 2 titles by this author, really loved both of them. I just love how far out outscope their mind is, and I love reading that. I love the illustration style. I love the color palette. I love how cute some of the characters are while they're also being like really weird and grotesque at the same time. It's just bizarre and fun, and I really like comics that are like that. So that one was a lot of fun for me. And then as for my favorite manga read of the year, this is another title I read because it was on my 1001 Comics list, and that is Honey and Clover by Chika Umino. This is another coming-of-age type story. In it, though, it is about a group of characters, all who are students at an art college and one who is a teacher at the college. And they all have sort of varying levels of proficiency. One of them is obviously, well, maybe two of them are obviously a genius. There's another who is kind of bumbling around, and they all are sort of at different stages, so some of them graduate early. They all have different drama related to their relationships. They're all sort of trying to find themselves as artists, as humans. And, you know, while you're reading it, you start off thinking, you know, this is going to be kind of more of a romance, but it really isn't. It kind of turns into more of a self-exploration, looking at yourself, you know, deciding what it is you want to do with your life, who you are as a person, and how you can express that as an artist. I don't even know how I can explain it so much, but I was really moved by this. I remember I cried a lot by the end of this. And it's one that's maybe not quite as memorable as maybe Dragonhead is memorable, which is good, I guess. I think that's memorable for maybe very impactful. This one I definitely will have to read again and again. And I think that as you know, age, whatever stage in life you are, you'll get something different out of this manga, because, you know, everyone goes through different experiences, has different life histories, and this is just sort of like putting those pieces together, trying to figure out what your life is and where it should be going and what kind of your value is as a person. Or at least that's sort of how I interpreted it, how I felt about it. I really, really loved this manga. I loved all of the characters in it. Well, apart from one, but I didn't dislike him either. I just thought he was kind of a dum-dum. But I really love this title. It was quiet and it was introspective and really moving and beautifully illustrated. I don't know if this one is available anywhere anymore, but I certainly would recommend that anyone should pick this up if you have a chance to pick it up. I think it's only 10 volumes long. It's just here across the room. It's 10 volumes long, so if you ever have a chance to pick it up, please do. It is so wonderful. It is such an emotional, cathartic type read. I wouldn't say it's a roller coaster, it's just a cathartic read. It's so impactful by the end, and it's just such a good title, such a good manga. So I had such a good reading year. I read some fantastic manga. Definitely favorite titles that I would maybe even put into my top 50, you know, favorites. So I had a really great reading year. Let me know down below what your favorite 3 manga were of the year, or your favorite 3 novels were of last year or 2019. Whenever this gets posted, I'm not really sure yet. Let me know that down below. I would love to know what your favorites were of the year. If you really found some new favorites, that would be really, really great to hear. Anyway, I think that's it for the year. I'm not going to read any more. I don't think I'm going to read any more top titles by the end of the year. It is the 28th today, so I don't really have too much time left. But I am looking forward to next year. You know, I have lots of reading plans for next year. There's so many mangas still on my shelves that I haven't read. There's still so many manga in that 1001 Comics book that I haven't read yet. So I'm expecting another really great year of reading manga. There's going to be so many good titles that I'm looking forward to. So I hope you enjoy. Let me know about your favorites down below. And yeah, and let's look forward to 2020. Anyway, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye for now.